Greetings, Zimbabwe, Africa, and the world. Welcome to In Conversation with Trevor, brought to you by Titan Law. I go beyond the headlines and beyond the sensational. Today we are live at Bishopslea School in conversation with the Headmaster, Rick Crook, discussing dyslexia, ADD, ADHD, and we hope you enjoy the conversation. So we'll start at the beginning, Rick, for our cameras. Welcome to In Conversation with Trevor.
Thank you, morning.
And let's begin at the beginning, which is where did you go to primary school? Because that's where dyslexia, ADD, begins to manifest itself. And then,
Yes, we're born in Zimbabwe. Parents were living in Chilocho at the time. And then moved to Mzingwane, and my first school was Essexvale Primary School, which is now Isigodini. I went there, spent the first 2 years there, and as is fairly normal, I think, your first 2 years of primary school are infant school, grade 1, 2, infants 1, infants 2, as they were in those days. You're fairly closeted, so I don't really remember too much about that. Then went off, got transferred, my father got transferred to Bulawayo and went to grade 3 in Bulawayo. And as is quite normal with many dyslexic children, the problems start manifesting themselves in grade 3. And although I don't remember grade 1 and 2 very much, I certainly remember my grade 3 year.
So clearly something happened at grade 3 that makes you remember that grade 3. Could you just share with us what you experienced?
Well, I was at a fairly large school. In fact, I was at Milton Junior School. Went into grade 3, was bottom of the C stream, and I remember being considered for the D stream. I couldn't read, I couldn't spell, I don't think I could any arithmetic ability at all. I think I was a nightmare to the teachers. I do remember, sort of the old thing where being sent to the headmaster many times, standing at the teacher's desk where she would mark with one hand and had a stick with the other and whack you on the back of the legs every time you got something wrong, which for me was, sort of most of the page. So, and I believed at that stage, yes, as you said, that there was something must have been wrong with me, and I was dumb.
What did that do to you at that particular time, if you can remember?
I think it, sort of, it's an acceptance that you're different to everybody else. And an acceptance that you're not going to do well academically, sort of that. And I suppose, in effect, you might as well not try, really, because if you're going to try and it's not going to be acknowledged or you're not going to get anywhere, then what's the point? So those years from grade 3, 4, 5, after grade 3, my father, who was an agriculturist, decided to go into education. We went to England for a year where he went back to study. I went to 2 schools in England, then came back. But right up until grade 6, grade 6, and I did repeat grade 6 when we moved. I did grade 6 in Bulawayo and then grade 6 again. I believe that there was absolutely no hope for me whatsoever. And there wasn't. I mean, to be honest, if you saw my books, everything was just red, and so it was the typical dyslexic and ADD. And
did you know at that particular time that you're dyslexic?
Oh, absolutely not. In fact,
you didn't know?
No, not at all. I don't think it was recognized in those days.
Did your teachers know?
No.
They didn't know?
No.
What did the beating, being number last in the class, what did that do to you as a person?
I think what it does is it takes away any dignity, and it prevents you having any expectation of yourself. And that, I think, is very, very significant, that you don't see a prospect. You don't know where you're going to go, what you're going to do. You can see where everybody else is sort of going, and you can see how they're progressing and how they're coping in that situation. You're not. So you sort of wonder what actually is going to happen to you in life.
And did you get the sense that anybody else around you understood what you're going through?
No, I remember being very isolated in that feeling.
Lonely?
Very lonely, yeah.
And what did that do to your attitudes towards education?
I just didn't like school, to be honest. I hated it. I'd much rather have been out fishing.
Mm-hmm. Why did you continue going to school?
My father was a headmaster. My mother was head of maths department at the senior school I ended up going to.
You had to go to school.
The only reason I ever sort of managed to get anywhere or pass the basics through senior school was being dragged kicking and screaming by my parents, I think.
We'll just pause there, and then let me share my experiences with you. My very first experience was repeating grade 1. And I have this vivid experience of sitting in class. Everybody being asked to go in front of the class on the blackboard, as it was, to write a word that the teacher wanted to be spelled. The word that my teacher wanted me to spell on the blackboard was boy. B-O-Y. I couldn't spell boy. I was bitten big time by this lady who had taken a liking to hating me. And that particular day, she bit me to the extent that my bottom bled. And when I got home, my grandmother was livid. My grandfather, I was in the rural areas, my grandfather wanted to go and fix this teacher. But my wise grandmother said, if you do that, you're messing up his education. Let's not do that. Let's find other ways of dealing with it. Like you, Rick, what it made me do was going to school every day was a nightmare. I hated it. The kids laughed at me. The teachers never looked at me. If they looked at me, I was an object of derision, and they laughed at me. And going to school became torture and became a nightmare. Rick, let me come to you. When then did you discover there was something wrong with you? It's grade 6 going forward.
In fact, when I repeated grade 6, that was a problem because, of course, now you're ridiculed as well because you're having to repeat. But going into grade 7, as with many people, you end up at some stage having a brilliant teacher. And I had an excellent teacher in grade 7 who saw something in me. He pushed me. And my grade 7 year was probably the best year I ever had at school because of the teacher.
Do you remember the name of the teacher?
I don't. No. Well, I remember very few names. It's one of the it's one of the things of my condition. I know that it affects people in different ways, but I forget names.
Okay.
Yeah, and all the time. And I mean, I can be standing here talking to you, and somebody will come, and I'll say, "Trevor, how are you doing?" And somebody will come here, and I'll say, "Oh, have you met?" and I'll have forgotten your name. It's one of the idiosyncrasies.
Rick, I'm exactly like that. I'm exactly like that. You tell me your name now, I forget it the next moment.
Yeah.
It's part of the condition.
Part of the
it's
condition.
Very frustrating, but that's the reality. The thing is, you embrace it and we live with it. We don't try and do stuff that you can't do. So that teacher came and made a difference.
He made an incredible difference, and I succeeded that year.
Do you remember in particular what this teacher did that made you turn around?
Thinking back, I think he focused on my strengths, not on my weaknesses. And that has been one of the things that I'm sure we'll be talking about as we go through. Yeah. One of the tactics is focusing on the strengths. When I did well that year, and I managed to get, having repeated, I managed to get into, for some reason, into the A stream at the senior school. And when I got into senior school, of course, there was Latin and things like that. So I ended up straight back at the bottom of the class. But I managed to stay there, but only just, with many coping mechanisms.
What were your coping mechanisms?
Okay, the one was that my spelling, I could not spell. I'm sure it'll come up later. I only learned to spell in my 20s. And my spelling, at all. It was horrific. And of course, you know, when you're in primary school, you want to write neatly because everybody's writing neatly, and you do try. And all that happens is the neater you write, the more obvious your spelling mistakes are. So you end up with this whole page full of red. When this started in Form 1, and I realized that my spelling was going to actually throw me out, I was going to have a serious problem with it. I developed a style of writing that can only be, sort of equated to being a doctor's scrawl. So you could read, you could make out what I read, what I wrote, but for the teacher, it really wasn't worth the energy to go through and see how many if there were any spelling mistakes. And that got me through my senior school and tertiary education. And if you ask my PA Val, I think she's about the only person in the world who can actually translate it even now.
There are similarities. We haven't discussed this, by the way, with Rick, but there are similarities there. So for me, prior to being discovered by this teacher, I had one of the worst experiences. I've just related to you a terrible experience with one teacher. So for the teachers that are in this audience, I think the message that I would want to say and share with you right now, Rick being a teacher himself and being a headmaster, is you have an amazing role in shaping these kids. You can destroy them or you can build them. The choice is up to you. The teacher who beat me so hard almost destroyed me. The truth is, up to today, Rick, I live with the scars of the abuse that I experienced. The verbal abuse and the physical abuse never goes away. It attacks my confidence, even as I'm talking to you right now. It attacks my confidence. When you look at me in a strange way, I think you know something I don't know, and I begin to question myself. I then, grade 6, I remember the teacher who discovered me, Mr. Bafundi Mpofu. He did something which is amazing. Gave us an assignment. You know what teachers do, walk behind you and stuff and see what you're writing. And he saw what I had written. By the way, my experience was I would never lift my hands in a class. Never. Because I had been told that I was dull, and I believed it. So I would never raise my hand. So Mr. Mpofu stood behind me and said, Trevor, amazing what you've written. Stand up and share with the class. I was shivering, jelly knees. I stood up and I read what I had written. The class went. The first time in my life that somebody had affirmed me. The first time in my life that somebody had said I could do something, that was a 10 for me. And as God would have it, the grade 6 teacher was also my grade 7 teacher. I passed my grade 7 with flying colors, having been number last. If there were 38 students in a class from grade 1, I was number 38. The transformation took place in grade 6 and grade 7. And I went to one of the best schools in Bulawayo, Mzilikazi High School. So you teachers can make the children that are dyslexic, or you can break them if you don't understand what it is that you're supposed to be dealing with. So Rick, I think we've talked about your journey. You are now headmaster, and you've done something amazing at Bishopslea, which is create a stream, create a way of encouraging these kids as they come in, as they learn. For the benefit of everybody else, what do you think are the indicators? How do you identify that a child is dyslexic? ADD, ADHD?
Okay, there's a long story involved in this. And the two need to be separated. Although a child who is dyslexic or ADD is more likely to be both, we know that the genes are very close together, and the effects are very different. They do need to be looked at independently, although in the classroom there are different strategies, but there are different strategies that for each one, and combined, that's what helps the child. If we start with the dyslexia, obviously the main indicators are the child battles to read, battles to spell, and write. You know, sort of. So I don't know how detailed or where do you want me to go. You know, sort of.
Just try and go as detailed as you can.
As detailed as I can.
Yeah.
Okay. As I said, the grade 1 and 2 you managed to get through. Grade 3 is where the problems seem to manifest themselves. And I didn't know I was dyslexic. Obviously, nobody, you know, it wasn't something that was really known in those days. And it was only as an adult, after I'd qualified as a teacher, that I realized that I was dyslexic. And I'd been teaching here for 4 years. I then left, went overseas, where I spent 11 and a half years. And initially I went to Greece, where I spent 9 years in total, and taught at a school big British international school there, which was headed at the time by the headmaster who had founded and run Millfield School in Somerset for 23 years. He had been asked to go out of retirement, to go to Greece to sort out the problems they thought, you know, to build a school, in fact. And I started teaching there. He had theories on dyslexia. I think he was dyslexic himself. And he mentored me. And through him, he started my journey on dyslexia when I sort of realized what I was. And from then on, where we've got to now with this ELP is a series of events that have happened through those years. Basically starting off with, I was teaching there, and what we had to do, well, what we did in those days was make a lot of extra money. You could basically double your salary by going and teaching private lessons in the evening. You were teaching Greek children how to speak and write English. But of course, when you go to do that, the Greek alphabet is completely different to the English alphabet. And so you go in as a dyslexic to teach somebody, which is, you know, sort of, I'm glad they didn't know, but you go in and you're teaching somebody how to speak and write English where you can't really do it yourself. And they've got a different alphabet as well. So the methods of teaching in those days, the methods of teaching reading in all our schools, in the English schools, was basically look and say. And you all know what look and say is. You have a card, piece of paper with the word cat on it, and you show it to the child and you say, this says cat, this says cat, this says cat, until the child memorizes that. Now you go to a Greek child and you say, right, okay, this says cat. And they look at you, yes, really? Why does it say cat? So after a while you work out that there's only one way to teach the English language. And that is, you have to sit down and teach all the sounds, and then teach the logic behind the word, teach why the word says what it does, and give them the tools in which to be able to do it themselves. Because, let me tell you, when they learn Greek, they learn it phonetically. So you do that. And the most incredible thing happened, because I was teaching children from as young as 7 years old to in their late teens. And this journey of teaching children of a second language and going through and having to say, well, this word says this because of this. And I will say, goodness, that's why it says this. You know, sort of, I learned more than the children that I was teaching and whose parents were paying me. It was actually quite ironic. But I did learn, and from those years of teaching a second language, I learned to spell. When then at Jack Meyer, who was the head of the school, I was 28, and I'd gone back to university to UK to further my studies for a year, come back, and while I was teaching there, he asked me to go back to Greece and take over a new branch of a school that they'd opened. So he made me a headmaster at age 28. And at that age, I'd been teaching these, I'd sort of learned now, you know, sort of how to, I was on that process of learning how to spell. So when I became a head, the first thing I did was go into the grade 1 classroom and say, right, well, how are you teaching? And of course, they were teaching look and say. And that's when I realized, I thought, there's a problem with the way in which we're teaching. We're spending 2 years teaching children words, to memorize words. And then what happens in grade 3 is, and the reading vocabulary to get through those first 2 years is about 500 words. A child of average intelligence is memorizing them, and remember that they're looking, to them it's a picture or a hieroglyphic, it's not a word. We're calling them words, but they're just memorizing shapes and things like that. So they get through that, they get through the reading scheme, and that's why many of these children are able to do it, because even if they don't do the whole 500 words, they do enough to get through a number of books. Of course, when you get into grade 3, the reading vocabulary increases to about 2,500 words. Now, you can't memorize 2,500 words. So those children who are not dyslexic or seem to pick up, you know, sort of the ability to read quite quickly, those who are, that's when the problems manifest themselves. And it's from the grade 3 that we do that.
Fascinating. I envy you because you now can spell. I still can't spell because nobody has described to me why boy is B-O-Y. Hopefully one day will. Let's get to the effects to the child in the classroom of being dyslexic or ADD. How does it manifest itself and what does it do to them?
The effect in the classroom is many. Firstly, the lack of ability to read means that they do things at a much slower pace. A child who's not dyslexic will read a passage or whatever they ask to read in a period of time. Somebody who's dyslexic, it takes a great deal longer to do that. That goes with writing. The child who's not dyslexic will write a page very quickly. The child who's dyslexic sometimes won't, you know, sort of it's easier not even to write the date than to even start. And
they tend to lose focus easily.
Well, that's
concentration.
That's the dyslexia aspect. The ADD aspect is, of course, what is ADD? If you're ADD, you lack concentration. So therefore now the teacher stands up in front of the class and can prepare a beautiful lesson. They can deliver it beautifully. But if your concentration span is only 1 or 2 minutes and it comes in and out, the poor ADD child sits there, the teacher's talking, the child looks as though they're listening, but of course the mind's going in and out. And at the end of the lesson, they've heard only a small percentage of what the teacher's been saying. And then the teacher says, well, right, now do this exercise. And of course, the child hasn't got the ability to do it because they haven't been listening.
Which is important that the teacher understands that if there are dyslexic ADD people in there, that the teaching method can't be the same for everybody.
That is the whole issue revolves around the delivery of the lesson, the teaching methods.
What's the effects on the pupils?
Well, what we found is that there's generally two categories of children reacting in different ways to it. Many of the children, if they're a soft character, they become very, very introverted. They become very nervous. They become very reticent. They want to hide in the classroom. They, much like you, they will never put up their hand. They want to keep their heads down below the parapet. They don't want to be picked on. And a lot of the sort of effort that goes into the lesson is actually trying to just keep out of the attention of the teacher. You get other children, of course, who are stronger characters, and they rebel. So you get children who are termed as having behavioral problems. Many of them actually know that they're not dumb, and perhaps they don't understand what's going on, and it's out of frustration that the behavior changes in the class, and they're constantly in trouble and things like that.
But I don't know, Rick, whether many of them don't know that they're dumb, because my experience, I mean, can you imagine at that age? I was convinced, Rick, that I was dumb.
So was I.
I was convinced that I was dull,
Yeah.
that I would never amount to anything. So so you can imagine as teachers the role that you have, thinking that you're doing an amazing thing, but in front of you sits people who, because of their experiences, because of who they are, because of their DNA and that kind of stuff, are having problems catching up with the stuff that you're teaching them. Correct me, the most important thing is to accept that there are individuals like these, that there are people like you and I, and then finding a special way of dealing with them.
I think the acceptance is one of the major issues in education. I can't tell you the number of times I've been in situations with educationists who don't accept. They presume that dyslexia or ADD is an excuse for a child being lazy. So, and if there's no acceptance, then there's going to be absolutely nothing done about it and no help given to these children. And these are the children that fall through the cracks. You know, sort of the education system actually fails them.
Wow. The education system fails them. The teachers fail them. What is interesting with me is that my grandmother didn't realize also the damage that she was doing, and my grandfather. Because the word that I was dull was thrown around in front of me. And the psychological effect that had was amazing. So being accepted, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, that it's not because I don't want to learn, it's not because I don't want to go to school, it's not because I don't want to go to do my homework, it's because I have a challenge that nobody has spotted. Am I right?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Nobody's giving you the help or the advice or that you need, or the understanding to help you sort of progress as you should.
Let's deal now with the amazing program that you started, the ELP classes. What's the thinking around the ELP classes? What is it that is done in those classes that is different, that makes these kids come out as amazing? My daughter was in the ELP class. She's come out, she's an amazing girl from what she was before she went into the ELP. Describe to us what that involves.
Okay, well, I think what we've done is we've looked at the children who have these problems and look at their particular needs. The ELP is misunderstood. Everybody presumes that our ELP...
What does ELP stand for, by the way?
Enhanced Learning Program.
Enhanced Learning Program. Those of you like me who didn't know. Okay. Enhanced Learning Program.
So everybody presumes that it's a remedial program. It's not a remedial program. And although there's various interpretations of what remedial actually means, in this situation, there's mainstream programs mainstream classes follow the syllabus in each subject for that year as defined by the Ministry of Education. Remedial goes back to cover gaps of what should have been learned or what hasn't been learned to bring them up to standard. So this ELP is mainstream. The children there learn exactly what the children in all the other classes do in mainstream. The difference is the teaching methods, and we have to look at the children that we're looking at. So and why these children don't achieve in a big class situation. The children that we're looking at are dyslexic and ADD. So that tells us the dyslexic children battle to read, to write. Even copying from the blackboard. If you're dyslexic, you tend to see things from left to right, right to left. The way in which you look things changes. So when a child is copying from the blackboard and there's a difficult word, they'll copy the first 3 letters of it and they'll put it down. Then they copy everything in 3s, we've discovered. The next 3, they have to look to find where those letters are. Of course, by the end of it, they're just looking at letters and writing them down, which is why the copying, and you say, but you're copying it, it's a correct spelling. But it isn't, it's copying from the blackboard and the dyslexia throws in. So you've got this, then you've got the ADD aspect of it, which means now that these children can't concentrate. So where we discovered this is through the educational psychologists, where we have these children who on face value, when you're talking to them, they're intelligent, they're eloquent, they've traveled, they're worldly, they can talk to you.
Like you and I.
Like you and I.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, so you get an expectation until we write something and we give it to the teacher,
Boom.
And the teacher says, "You've got to be kidding me." You know, sort of, there's a huge disparity between what you can say or verbally and what you can do in a conversation as to what you can put down on paper. So these now, you're looking at this, and teachers are coming and saying, "But you know, there should be something with this child." Now, here in Bishopslea, we teach in a very specific way. So we have from grade 1, we teach phonetically. My sort of view of it that we presume that every child coming into grade 1 is going to be dyslexic. So if they're going to be dyslexic, let's teach them as if they're going to be dyslexic from the first day they come in. So we teach them the sounds, we teach them how to put the words together. We're giving them the tools for them to do it themselves. So we're compensating to a great extent for this. But still, we were getting children in the higher grades that, yes, their reading wasn't that good. You know, it's all a process. But they still weren't achieving anywhere near what they should be doing. And the breakthrough came when we spoke to the educational psychologist, because we would send these children to the educational psychologist to get an idea of expectation. From this, we would get, as you said, the IQ. We would get a full-scale IQ. And the psychologist would come and say, well, this child's of average intelligence, therefore should be able to do well. But when we had specific cases and we delved deeper into it with the psychologist, we then learned that when they test for IQ, they test 5 different areas.
Right.
And it's those areas that they average out and give you the full scale. So the average is 100, and if somebody was absolutely average, they would score exactly 100 in each one of those areas. But what we found with many of these children is that the one area, which is the verbal comprehension index, which is an indicator of potential, could be very, very high. On the other end of the scale, their working memory index, which assesses short-term memory and concentration span, would be low. Also, their processing speeds would be low. When you average it out, they appear to be average, but in fact, from the verbal comprehension, they have a very high expectation. So that actually tells us now what the problem is and how do we deal with it. The problem, they have a high expectation, they're not achieving it because they have short concentration spans, they have reduced short-term memory, short-term memory, and the processing speed is slow. So now you look at those and it basically tells you what to do. So in the ELP, we've changed the teaching methods to adapt for those.
So does it mean you found special teachers that can do this stuff? Is that what you've done?
Oh, we've got very special teachers who can do this stuff.
All right, okay. I can see some of them out there.
The teachers have to have an understanding and, most important, an empathy and a will to help these children. If they haven't got that,
and empathy and understanding. And I want to go to what you said, which hopefully people picked out there. The frustration of she speaks so well, and yet she writes so badly. And what you say is, there must be something special here. There is something special there. And the challenge is to find that something special in that child. And you won't do this by hurrying through this. You won't do this by assuming that the 27 kids in the class are all the same. Some of them are special. They require more of your attention. Let's move to home now, the parents. What should the parents do?
Okay, well, the first thing, parents, is that it's hereditary.
Comes from you. It comes from you.
So if it's not you, it's your husband or your wife or their family. But the first thing, of course, is an understanding of this. I think what often happens is that not all the children in a family are affected the same. So it's an understanding, it's a not comparing one sibling with the other, because you can have one sibling that is not affected in the least, and you can get the other one who seemed to got all those genes from all the families, sort of in one throw.
Rick, I want to stop you there because I think that's so hugely important. There might be your children, but they're not the same. So do not compare them. Do not say anything negative in front of them. John is brighter than whoever. Do not do that because you are doing what my grandmother did. First thing. Second thing, do not compare them to your neighbor's children, because your neighbor's children don't have the same DNA as you. They are different. Do not compare them to their friends. They are special kids. Treat them as individuals and not as a collective and not as part of your neighborhood community. They are individuals. They deserve to be treated as individuals. Anything else that the parents should not do? or should do?
Should do. Have patience. It takes an incredible amount of patience. The amount of energy and work that you have to put in with these children doing homework, and I fully understand it. Sort of you think you've got all the answers, and then God says, well, maybe we'll teach you a lesson, and gives you the most dyslexic child that you've ever come across. And now you have to do the homework with them, you have to do the reading, and it's very, very frustrating to do it. I mean, I'm sure those of you who are parents here will know that, sort of you're sitting there, and to do the one page of reading can take 45 minutes when they're looking at it and they're saying, man.
Can I go and watch a movie?
Dad, do you know what happened in school today? So you all know this. So it's the patience. The other thing to understand is that it is a process. I think this is not only for parents, but for teachers as well. You think you're not getting anywhere. You think it's not going, and you're putting all this effort in. It is going in. It is being stored somewhere in the brain in a database, and that database grows. And as the children grow up and as the maturity develops, those dots start joining together. The problem is where those children have been disregarded. And when they reach a point where those dots can start joining together, and there are no dots, that is the issue.
That is the issue. And it's about, Rick, it's about love, tender, and care. So I take a month to read a book that my wife reads in a week. That's okay. I'm reading. That's what's important. Your child will take 5 minutes to read a page that another child's take a minute to read. As Rick says, the dots from grade 1 are being created, it's being stored somewhere. What's important is that what you are doing helps them connect those dots when that opportunity arrives. When you block that opportunity to connect those dots, you have damaged your child forever. The other thing, Rick, is it important for me to score 7 A's, 3 A's? Is that important?
You mean at O-level?
Or O-level, A-level.
The O-level, where everybody else is boasting about their 13 A stars, and your child just happens to have scraped through.
Yeah.
No, sort of, as I say, it's a process. Education, as we go through it, all you need to do is get to the next level. Once you get to the next level, you then relax and you say, right, the next I've got to achieve, and it doesn't matter whether it takes you 1 year like everybody else, or it takes you 2 years, or it takes you 3 years. As long as you get to the next level, and then you go on, because who ever heard of somebody who's been to university and they say, oh, you've got a degree in political science or education. Oh, really? Oh, how many A stars did you get at O-level?
No. Yeah, I never had that. So I think it's important, parents and teachers, to realize that it would be great to have the 3 A's or the 7 A's, but 51% is good enough for as long as it allows them to go to the next round. And guess what? A lot of people that Rick and I were in school with, who had the 3 A's and 7 A's, we don't know where they are right now. Okay? Remember that. That's a fact. Okay? I never had the 7 A's and whatever. I had my D's, whatever. But they made me go to A level. And the people that had their 7 A's right now are no better than the person that I am right now. I've gotten to a point where those dots have connected. And that's the role that you as a parent have, to help your child get to the next level through encouragement, through investing time in helping them read. The 3 A's are ideal, but do not succumb to societal pressure that says when your child comes home without the 3 A's, they are dumb. Do not succumb to societal pressure that says A levels without 7 A's or whatever is dumb. It isn't. Your role is to hold their hands, give them the support and encouragement at home to move to the next level, and you'll be amazed. Yes,
Can I
Rick?
just add
Sure.
something to that? I think my sort of personal experience certainly helped with my understanding of this, because when I first qualified as a teacher, those 3 years that I spent at tertiary, those first 3 years, I found extremely difficult. I mean, you know, sort of I was always worried that I was never going to actually pass it. But I did pass it and I became a teacher. And I didn't really, to be honest, I didn't really want to become a teacher in the first place. But, you know, sort of I wanted to become a professional hunter, actually. And that opportunity was taken away. So my parents suggested I go and become a teacher. I never realized it would become my passion in life. But when I went back at age 27, I went to UK to further my education. I couldn't believe the difference in myself. I was now older. I was 27 years old. I developed coping mechanisms. My concentration span was much longer. It was very, very much easier. And I was absolutely dreading it. I thought I was going to go in as a mature student and be, you know, sort of everybody looking at me, looking as well. Here's the dummy coming back. But by that stage, it was totally different. So you do grow in. The problem is that you don't want to have to wait till you're 27 to start school. We start school when we're 5 years old. So what we want to do is start the process from then.
Yeah, fantastic. Rick, what is it that we need to what is it that the learner needs to know?
I think, firstly, as you said, we've gone through life presuming that we were dumb. To be honest, when I became a headmaster at age 28, my biggest fear was that everybody would see through me. And that I would do something, and everybody would say, well, he hasn't got the intellect to be a headmaster, or the intellectual capacity. And it was only years later, many years later, when talking with my mother, and because we're a family of educationists. My sister's a headmistress. She's more dyslexic than she's ADD. My brother's a headmaster. He's more ADD than dyslexic, and we've all got ADD and dyslexic children. Well, at least one. And talking with my mother, I must have been late 30s or around 40 years old, and we were talking about potentials, and I said, well, you know, sort of, I battle exactly this. Somebody's going to see through me. And my mother said, you know, sort of, but you're very intelligent. And I looked at her and I said, you know, sort of, Mom, do you know how many mothers I've had in my office at school telling me, my son is very intelligent? I said, you know, I'll take that with a pinch of salt. And she said, no. She said, they'd had me assessed when I was 12 years old.
Wow.
And I don't really remember it. But what I said was, well, can you tell me what what the result was? And she said, no, I can't do that. I said, why not? She said, it's confidential. She was in her 70s, and I'd been a headmaster for I don't know how many years. Anyway, she told me, and from that moment I thought, well, why? I always thought I was achieving way beyond my potential. I'd gone through my whole life limiting my own ambition and what I was like to be able to do because of that interpretation. So with these children, I think the first thing to do is actually get them to understand that they have got a chance in life from as early as possible, just to give them that confidence. You mentioned confidence. The big problem is the lack of confidence that you go through is absolutely incredible. You know, sort of you're battling that. It's an internal battle with confidence every day of your life.
Wow. The moral of the story, I suppose, is instead of keeping your tests confidential and only hinting at 27, mom should have told you at 12.
Yes. And to be honest, you don't have to give specifics, but a child can be sat down and have it explained to them.
So I think that's it then, that you need to find a gentle way of explaining their condition to the kids so that they understand what they are dealing with, that they're not hopeless, but there's a reality that they need to embrace and lean into. And then I think they will appreciate what you are doing more if you're spending more time teaching them and that kind of stuff, because they do have this challenge. Only when you've explained it to them would they appreciate that. Rick, you've been very vulnerable, which is excellent. We love that. Thank you so much for that. We'll now turn to questions. Any suggestions from members of the audience? This is an important part of the show. If there's something that we've said that you don't agree with, if you have read something that you think is going to help everybody in the room, please, this is an opportunity for us to ask questions or to share. Raise your hand. Don't be afraid to raise your hand like me. Raise your hand and share as much as possible.